So the Switch 2 might be dropping in June thanks to some reports from a former employee in the retail customer space at Nintendo. Let's go ahead and break down that news in regards to what it means for us in terms of the arrival of the system, as well as pre-orders and how Nintendo might be trying to mitigate as much scalping as possible. So this article comes from Video Game Chronicles. It just came out February 23rd, 3:16 p.m. But it's actually referencing a podcast that was posted on the Kit and Krista channel over on YouTube. Podcast was posted a few days ago, and I'll just say this, go ahead and watch them. I really enjoy their content because they're both passionate about Nintendo and they worked for the company. So they have a lot of good insight in terms of the machinations and how Nintendo lives and breathes. And while they might not be the biggest channel, I'm not either, obviously, but I think their insight is extremely valuable when it comes to understanding what Nintendo might be doing. And again, this podcast interview was a few days ago, and they had a former employee, Sean, who worked in the retail space. And what does that mean? So when it comes to these larger companies, whether they're doing video games or they're just selling consumer packaged goods, retail customer service or customer-oriented retail positions, they're the ones that work with the Walmarts, the Targets, the Amazon to ensure that whatever product the company, in this case Nintendo, is trying to get distributed, that the deals in terms of how that product is represented, how much they get from working with that retailer, it's all negotiated with that retail customer expert. And so I love this perspective from Sean, so go ahead and check the podcast out. So the reason why I love it is because I actually used to work in this space, a consumer packaged goods space. I worked for a large company called GlaxoSmithKline. And if you ever use the toothpaste Sensodyne Pronamel, well, I used to be a brand manager for that product. So I had a retail customer guy I worked with who made sure that my toothpaste was always in the proper places at places like Target and Walmart, Dollar General, and so on. But I digress. So this is coming from that expertise perspective, and Sean worked for the company up until I think 2018 or 2019, and he essentially goes through this interview saying, here's what I think Nintendo is going to do from a launch perspective. Here's where things are probably at internally and externally between Nintendo and retailers at the moment. It's really fascinating stuff, but the article itself, I don't think it's the most interesting stuff, but we're going to go ahead and talk a little bit about the article. Article again just goes over the information I just shared. Sean worked in sales and retail department at Nintendo's US arm, recently appeared with his former colleagues on the podcast, and according to the former employee, Nintendo will definitely share plans to release Switch 2 before the end of the summer during its upcoming Nintendo Switch 2 Direct in April. So this is saying obvious things, but Sean is leveraging his experience in time to market within these distribution chains to say, hey, if we have this announcement in April, and just based on what they've probably done in the past with the Switch and the Wii U, we could reasonably expect that since retailers like Walmart, Amazon, and Target don't know a thing yet about prices and all that, it's getting real close to that April date. And so realistically, it probably is that June timeframe. And June works for a lot of reasons in regards to hitting at the right time, right before the holiday season, a few months after that, a couple quarters after that, and so forth. Now, the article continues saying they're going to want the system to be out before the end of the summer. I would say at the start of the summer and at the end of the school year. So you have kids talking about what they're excited for. And again, that goes back to what I was saying, that this is why it's the perfect time for that kind of launch window to generate some natural organic excitement before the holiday season as well. Article then continues to say, I think we'll see a June launch. I'm thinking maybe mid-June or a little bit later than that, but definitely before the end of the summer. That thing's coming out. There are good strategic reasons why that would be a part of the consideration. So again, he's referencing natural market considerations you want to make with this, right? Where are your consumers? How are we getting their attention? How do we generate organic hype? And what's realistic too in relation to where we're at with manufacturing and distribution and overall announcement to our retail customers. Now, again, June seems realistic. In fact, June was pontificated already, June, July. I think June seems more realistic than July just because of how quick the Switch 1 released after they announced it back in 2017. It was actually May, and I could see Nintendo wanting to actually hit that as well, but things might not be working out. So June very well could be it. So again, we could be seeing this in June. We know we're seeing it before August, absolutely, without a question. We still don't know the price, and he kind of makes a jab, Sean, that is, in the podcast, because I don't know if you guys seen, but there was a supposed leak from Costco Canada that when you translate it to US dollars away from the Canadian value currency, it comes about to be $349.99, which is the perfect price if you ask me. I mean, it's a little bit more than the Switch was at launch, but again, we're dealing with a lot of different factors. And when you account for inflation, especially consumer price index inflation from when the original NES launched, it's actually cheaper than what the NES would be today if it launched at that original price. Again, we don't know anything about pricing. We'll probably learn more about that in April. Retailers don't know a thing about it, but none of that was the most interesting thing to me. To me, the most interesting thing was his expertise in retail and customer distribution, talking about how Nintendo be doing something radically different to mitigate scalping and to ensure really desirable Nintendo customers can get their hands on a system. And this comes down to how they might handle pre-orders. Now, one thing I want to call out, what Sean hits on is something someone else has said recently on Twitter a few weeks ago, and that's Paul Gale Network. Paul Gale, he's an industry expert. He posts and talks a lot on his YouTube channel, as well on his Twitter page, just about the various things that Nintendo is doing, and gives it that extra insider perspective from a business economics side that I think is also really valuable. And Paul said this a few weeks ago, and it was really reassuring for Sean to essentially say the same thing, is that is Nintendo could leverage their own e-commerce site, that is nintendoshop.com or whatever the URL is, to do something similar that Sony PlayStation did with the PlayStation 5 Pro, and that is to ensure customers who have a Nintendo account have a chance at pre-ordering the system. And one way to mitigate scalpers just going hog wild on GameStop and Amazon and so forth, but also to leverage this system to find people who have a Nintendo online account, attach it to the pre-order requisition, and again, just make sure that people that really want the system do have that chance. Now, there's a lot of different ways Nintendo could go about doing this, but why I think this is even more of a possibility with someone like Sean saying it, as well as Paul saying it, is Sean knows Nintendo. Now, granted, he left in 2019, but the one thing he did call out is the fact that Nintendo didn't have this website, didn't have this large-scale e-commerce ability to what they're doing now. Back when the original Switch launched, there's probably certain things you could get from the site, but they clearly beefed up their network profile capabilities now that we know our online profile is going to carry over from the Switch 1 and the Switch 2, that they have this grounded foundational network identification platform that's going to be really critical to possibly making something like this happen. And that's why he even more so believes it's possible now, especially when you consider, and this is what he said, that brick and mortar stores really aren't selling games anymore either. And he hinted that in the future, we may be in a place where we don't ever buy hardware from brick and mortar stores ever again. We simply go to the manufacturer's website to buy the product, which seems weird, but could be where we're headed. And that very well could benefit us when it comes to the launch of the Switch 2 in terms of getting our hands on pre-orders. Now, I recommend checking the podcast out with Kit and Krista because, again, it was a great interview. Actually go into the comments and see a comment from me commending the interview itself. But they talk a lot more about how the relationship works between a company like Nintendo and their retail partners, and I just find it extremely fascinating. Like, my dream job, straight up, would be to work at a company like Nintendo. Again, my experience as a brand manager, I always could see translating in Nintendo, especially since I've also worked in software and video game development on the side too. So it's just, I loved it. Go check out Kit and Krista. Let me know your thoughts. Do you think we're getting the June release date? Do you think Nintendo really will find a way to kind of snip all those scalpers in the butt? Let's hope so. Like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video. And as always, happy gaming.